Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity.
On today's show, we welcome back the hilarious, the sexy, the insightful Robin Scott Okamoto in his yeah, you like that? It's your third time on.
Best intro ever. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. I'm just gonna from now on, every time you're on, you are now the hilarious, the sexy, the insightful. I think that's
I'm gonna make that my writer for all podcasts I go on.
Good.
I have to be introduced that way.
just people are like, do you have a short bio? And don't even put anything but the hilarious, the sexy, the insightful.
Just those three things. That's all I need.
It's your third time on, and it's your first time on though with your new book out/coming out very soon, depending on which medium you prefer. It's called Asian American Apostate: Losing Religion and Finding Myself at an Evangelical University. If you've listened to previous episodes where Scott's been on, or listen to the episode at his own podcast, Chapel Probation, you know some stuff about Scott. But Scott, we're going to talk about some more stuff because I just like having you on. So welcome back.
Thanks. I always like being here. We've mentioned before, I feel like a little bit of a void with Chris not here to lean on. Sort of like the third foot of the table.
It's like the third stooge is missing.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we got it. We got this.
We've got it. We'll handle it.
I'm a professional. I'll power through.
Chris, you're in our thoughts and prayers, wherever you might be right now. I didn't even tell him you were coming on. I feel kind of bad, maybe.
It's like we're cheating on him.
Yeah. This is going to be horrible.
Chris, I had no idea. He's
going to be heartbroken. Oh, what a way to find out. Anyways, I wanted to have you on because I recently wrote a profile on you too, and we talked about some of this, but also the book definitely covers this topic too. This idea of diversity, both in larger culture and in Christianity. I know a little bit about this, but go into as much depth as you want. Before you were 18, when you were still a child, how did you perceive the non-cis-het white world? Just anything that wasn't a straight white man. How did you perceive that, do you think?
Ooh, very suspiciously, cautiously, fearfully. The cis-het, particularly white identity was the gold standard of existence. And then everything outside of that was terrifying. It was out to get you. That's how it was taught. The Dobson teaching, or the church teaching. And that made me kind of hate parts of myself because I was not all of that. I was the cis-het part, but not the white part. So I felt like I had to overcome that, make up for that. And I tried to out-white whiteness in my youth. So I played baseball, and I took batting lessons from a former minor league player, and I played guitar, and I had to be the best guitar player at my school because King of the Mountain, And then I hunted and fished, so I could be a redneck, and I did all these things. Even none of my white friends did any of these things, but I felt like I just had to be Mr. America, and sort of mask anything foreign or anything BIPOC. We didn't have that term, but anything that wasn't white centered, I ignored, and I just tried to establish myself as at least an honorary white person in any space I was in. Sad, huh?
Yeah, it is sad. Well, and there's two things that kind of come to mind with it. One is it's very interesting that it almost sounds like the standard world, if you will, the white male world was was almost safe because you're saying everything outside was scary. And I'm curious if you think that was more just exposure, like what you were around, like because it's what, like when you grow up in certain environments, you're just comfortable in what you're seeing,
Yeah.
So do you think it was that, or do you think there was like explicit things you were being taught that like made you feel safer there?
Yeah, I don't think it was explicit. I think it was subtle. And I think I like the word comfort. Um, that was my comfort zone to relate to and perform whiteness, white maleness, to aspire to it. Because it felt a little dangerous because I think I was always worried that people would see through it or actually look at my face, heaven forbid, and say, "Oh wait, you're not this. What are you doing here?" So that fear was always in the back of my mind. No, and even though I succeeded, in large part, I became the guitar player guy on the worship team, and I had a band that we played at school things and church things. Um, I hit 400 my last season playing baseball. I was the star pitcher. I got my hunting license before I knew anyone else my age, had one for pheasant and birds, not like big game, but I knew my way around firearms. How white male is that? I was doing it all. I knew how to go to the backcountry of the Sierra Nevadas up here and catch fish and camp and do all these manly things in a 4x4 and with guns and fishing poles and um I don't know if the funny thing was it didn't even matter. I think people still just saw me as this weird Asian kid. But in my head, I was trying to do it, and so in that, to your point, it felt comfortable to me. I made myself sort of conform to this identity, and that was where I felt like both comfort and a little bit of like live without a net fear of like, oof, this could be ripped out from me at any moment.
Sounds like a lot of work. I mean, like it sounds like you had to like constantly be monitoring something. There was something earlier you said too about like wanting to be kind of Mr. America. Were you like, would you define yourself as like patriotic as a child?
Oh yeah, big time. But so quick, a little ethnic studies lesson about Japanese Americans. Both my parents were in the incarceration camps of World War II. So they got their whole families lost all their belongings, lost all their stuff, and got sent to jail during World War II, out in the desert. My mom at Gila River, Arizona, on an Indian reservation, and my dad at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, just outside of Cody. And their families came out of it, like a lot of Japanese Americans of that generation, hyper patriotic because they felt like they had to prove their Americanness. And so they were going to kind of like what I was doing, but on a much grander scale. They had to show the world that they were to be trusted. They were good Americans. They weren't loyal to Japan. So my dad became like an Eagle Scout in the Scouts. He got drafted and went in the Army, and then signed up again for a second stint after he got out of dental school. So I was born at Fort Dix, New Jersey, on an Army base. Yeah, we were hyper patriotic. My dad was always telling me and my brother that America is the greatest country in the world, and he would say like he came out of the camps and he made something of himself, and that could only happen in America, is what he kept telling us. It wasn't until we got older we were like, actually, that could happen in a lot of countries. There's upward mobility in several countries. And they have like healthcare and like free education and stuff. So like, wouldn't that be better? But that came later. So as a kid, I was like super patriotic, all about America and being an American. My dad would always say, "You're just as good as everyone else, and no one else is better than you, and you're not better than anyone else." And so I believed that, even though what I was seeing and experiencing did not necessarily confirm that. I wasn't treated as an American. I was a fourth generation Japanese American who grew up as kind of an immigrant with the immigrant experience. Because I didn't look like everyone around me. I was like the only one of just, I think, two Asian kids in an all white school for elementary school.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing for me to picture because I didn't necessarily grow up that patriotic. I mean, certainly what to me, and I wonder if this is like a cultural or ethnic thing itself. Like for me, being patriotic was kind of like, like both my granddads were war vets, and like, there was like a reverence for the US in like a respect way, but I never felt like I had to perform extra. So it's interesting, this idea of like, I don't know, like I kind of want to, did you have like American flag up in your room? Was it like that? Or was it just more like in your behavior? Like how were you displaying patriotism?
Yeah. For me, it was definitely like this kind of performative thing where I would go out of my way to talk about baseball, the Dodgers here in LA, and the Lakers and my fishing exploits, and I shot a pheasant, and I felt like I was that kid that was always like reading his resume to the room, just so everyone knew, I'm super American, and yeah. As far as a flag, I didn't have one in my room, but my every like 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day, my dad would put out this big, huge American flag in our front yard.
My dad still does that to this day. Actually, not in our yard, but he has like a flag holder on the front door or whatever. And
we had a flag holder like next to the front door. Same thing. And this big, like 4 or 5 foot American flag hanging there.
Well, and isn't that the American dream? Scott?
It is.
Isn't that
I
it?
think my parents would tell you they had it. They got they came out of this bad situation, the camps, and got their education and entered solid middle class America in Southern California. Started attending a predominantly white church and became like the model minority people who were let onto committees. And my mom was the first non-white deaconess of the church.
Oh wow!
And my dad was a deacon and then put on like I forget what it's called, ministry board council thing.
Mm-hmm.
So to my parents, they will tell people they achieved the American dream.
Well, and that's what's so interesting to me on the topic of like, because there's kind of, I mean, it's hard now because I mean, what I picture when I picture patriotism is not really patriotism. I picture like far right bullshit.
Well, they've kind of co-opted it, right?
Yeah, exactly. But like, it is interesting because when I think about how I grew up, it was more like there was a sense of freedom for all. It wasn't always stated, and clearly there was some subtler things going on. But it was like, what makes America great? Well, freedom. There's no other place where everyone has the opportunity. Like that was kind of the mythology, right?
Right.
And so in some ways that is kind of like inclusive, but studying history, that's clearly very like post-civil rights. That's very clearly like
it's newer.
Like a rewriting. Yeah. So I don't know, but so I know you well enough to know that your perceptions of certainly your like ethnicity and identity as both an Asian American and Japanese American, like I know that evolved over time, right? As a young adult.
Sure.
As a young adult, like correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of like had a desire for there to be more diversity in the kingdom of God. Is that correct?
I don't know if I would have put it that way, but yeah, I think that's true. Just because I wanted to be included, because as hard as I tried, I think my whole goal was to be white, to become an honorary, and and when my friends, well-meaning friends, would tell me, we don't see you as Oriental or Asian or Japanese, we see you as one of us. They meant it as a compliment, and I took it as a compliment. Like, ooh, that means I made it. I just have to, ignore my identity, and I can fit in and be one of this community. So as far as when I was a kid, yeah, I think I would have in my worst days, I think I would have I would have put limits on who gets into the club. I think, and it wasn't the new kids from Taiwan. You know, those kids bothered me. They were like blowing my cover. This is so embarrassing to admit, by the way. But
well, I
when
admire.
there's an
Listen,
influx of-
we're under 18. We're not going to say what I was saying under 18. So
Yeah, right. I mean, I was like 11 or 12 when the city I grew up in is now considered Taiwan West. it's the school is like 75% Taiwanese kids, which is hilarious when you look back at what it used to be. Oh, the city of Arcadia was deep inside what they call redlining. They wouldn't let they would not sell houses to black or brown people in the city. My parents slipped in because they weren't really sure what the hell they were. In 1977, they had meetings apparently in the neighborhood. Like, oh, there's these people moving in, and I don't know. Maybe they're the good ones. He's a dentist.
I'm kind of interested then in like the development from that to this is going to fast forward in your life quite a bit, but I know like at one point like you were deeply invested in like helping Christians understand the importance of diversity.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain that development, like take your time, but kind of how you go from wanting to achieve this sort of white standard of Americana / Christianity / whatever it was to like wanting to help Christians like understand the importance of diversity?
Yeah. So picking up where I was as a kid, I was pretty self-loathing as far as the Asian stuff. Confronted with all these new Asians from another country who didn't speak English or spoke very little English. I was very judgmental of them, but then I became friends with them in junior high and high school. And I go to InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at UC San Diego, and I've got these people telling me, you need to, be proud of being Japanese American. And I resisted it. I was like, why? I've made it. I'm an honorary white person, so I'm good. But to their credit, these older upperclassmen Christian folks who were, many different races, including white, they kept at it because they knew I was going to be leading worship, and they needed me to understand, and so they were very patient with me, and they showed me why it's important to be okay with who you are. It sounds so dumb now, but I was a hard case for them, and they kept at it, and I finally realized, oh yeah, I guess this is important. And so once I made that switch, it became my mission to help my fellow Christians see me as an Asian American, and also help other Asian Americans who are just like me to, it's okay to claim this, to be proud of it, to explore what it means. And to InterVarsity's credit, in the early 90s, this would have been, they were really kind of ahead of the curve as far as this issue of diversity. Our friends in Campus Crusade were very far behind. Now there was still problems with the whole thing, but they did. There's this thing called Urbana, which is their big yearly conference. It's really crappy, but in the early 90s, for like a few years in a row, they really stressed diversity and digging into diversity and racial reconciliation between whites and non-whites, and even between the other races. They eventually backed off from that. The Bush years kind of wiped all that out, from what I've heard, and they've been sort of backtracking ever since. And then Obama just completely obliterated the diversity issues with InterVarsity. But I had a good beginning, and ironically, it became part of my deconstruction, because the more I figured out about how race was taught to me in church, and how I was like allowed to just sell out my whole identity to try and fit a white identity, the angrier I got, and the more resentful I felt about my church upbringing, the culture of evangelicalism that would not just allow me but encourage me to not do this, to not follow who I was and be proud of who I was.
Well, I'm glad you got here.
It took a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
It's
sure it did.
embarrassing.
And
Like I said, like I'm sitting here cringing as I'm recounting all this. I'm like, oh my gosh.
yeah,
Ugh.
it's hard to not be a former evangelical and not feel cringy when you access memory.
There's so many layers
happens.
of cringe as we look back.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel it too. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have too much to share. Only, the only things that kind of come to mind is like, I grew up in a part of town where I would have been considered what people now call a white minority. And like, and, kind of had some racial consciousness, but not really. And like, certainly like, I think white kids are afforded a level of permissible racism, I guess. And so like I kind of had resentment towards specifically black people just because they were different and I wasn't like interacting with black people at church or anything very much. So like but then like, my first job, I was like the one of like two white kids who worked there as a teenager. And that kind of like changed a lot of things. And before that, just through sports and music and stuff, just it's kind of like the exposure took care of the ignorance part of it. Right. And so, I did, but just being in college and Bible college, it definitely transformed into, I was like, oh, like there's a lot of Christians who are just straight up racist. Like I didn't really perceive that until I saw it so blatant when I went to Bible college. Like I was like, y'all, come on.
There's always someone more racist or less racist. And we all have, we all have assumptions and biases in our heads and that we need to confront and address on a lot of levels. But
definitely. And there's still things I'll find about myself that I'm like, ooh, I need to listen to whatever that is and figure out that and take care of that. Like if I just like an unconscious bias or something that in the way I talk or whatever. But yeah, it is interesting though, because I never had to experience you're white, so you suck. Like I didn't really, like people, there's a lot of fragile white people who like to claim they like are taught to be ashamed for being white. And I'm just like, by who?
Right.
Like I've never like had that. And they're like, well, I'm like, every time I've heard a criticism of whiteness, I've never been like, oh yeah, that's me. Because I'm like beyond that. Because I don't, the thing that's being critiqued is not my personality. The thing that's being critiqued is, the systemic nature and what whiteness is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's right. The weird thing is the only people I've ever seen who try to make white people feel guilty for being white are white people. The white guilt is a powerful thing. I don't think I've ever seen a black or Asian or Hispanic person just say you are terrible because you're white. In the most extreme cases, I'm sure that's there, but usually that messaging was coming from a well-intentioned and someone who's been on a journey, who has confronted historic and systemic racism and as often happens in a conversion situation, you kind of go real hard the other way.
No, totally agree. The performative activism of white people saying this person's opinion is invalid based on the color of their skin, like those kind of things do happen occasionally. But yeah, I've never had like someone who's not white like be like, you should be ashamed that you're white. That's never happened, and I don't think it does happen, frankly, at least on my radar.
Although I will say, I think because of the history of this country and because of the legacy of racism, I don't think white people get enough opportunities to really dig into who they are, for better and for worse. It's just the assumed norm, whitenesses, and so. Yeah, it would be wonderful if everyone, including white people, could all interrogate their identities and explore, the heritages of European things. And yeah, it's just rife. It's like a minefield of controversy because of the legacy of this country.
Agreed. Yeah, there's a it's I've gone through my ancestry.com, and it's a little bit like Minesweeper, because you get really like emotional and like proud of your family here, and then you see this document and you go, disgusting, right? Like, when you're a white person, you just go, oh my God, that's gross. I didn't want to know that, and I think that's, and it's not like I came from a super like high class family. It's just the nature of, like you said, the legacy of racism in this country. It's like you can be a bottom rung and still have committed, just like, have family who have committed terrible things. But I agree with you that, like, there shouldn't necessarily be just like shame in that automatically for you, because your identity can be separate from your family's identity. But exploring your heritage can be a wonderful thing. It doesn't have to be like a shameful thing if you're a white person, I don't think.
Right. No, I totally agree. We all have things that our cultures can be ashamed of. It's just in America. Like if I go to Japan, and I've only been there once, I'm a fourth generation American. Japan is committed tons of atrocities against Chinese, against Korean. Had this big war against Russia. And the people who are not Japanese who live in Japan get treated really bad. So it's whatever the dominant culture is that has the responsibility to sort of, make amends, to reconcile. And that rarely happens. And America is not unique in that sense. It's just that we have so many different kinds of people here in such great numbers. It's tough.
And we have a real bad problem with just denial of like what really happened. Like, and part of that denial compounds with the fact that our country is so young. Like, we try to like put so much distance between the atrocities of dominant culture in the US. And it's like, I'm sorry, the distance just isn't there,
Right.
Like, it's like that meme where it's like people talk about slaves, and like, a black person like posted a meme where or something to the effect of, it's like, you mean my grandma? Like, like, it's like it literally is this like kind of disconnect we have, understanding like the country is so young and has done a lot of damage in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, like my parents got married at a time when there were still laws in California against interracial marriage.
Yeah. I mean, my dad says, he's like, I drank from a white water fountain. My dad.
Whoa.
Like it's things that we want things to be more distant than they are.
Yeah. It's the ancient past, but it's just like, yeah, those are my parents.
Not really. Not really. Let me ask you this. I don't think it's as buzzy of a word as it was in kind of the early 2000s and the 90s, this idea of diversity. But
yeah.
What do you think American culture at large means when we say we need more diversity? What do you think is actually being said there?
Oh, yeah. So there's a couple of levels. On a capitalistic corporate level, it's just good business. So right now, Bud Light is in trouble with the conservatives, right? Because they feature.
Oh, don't even get me started.
So, and not saying anything good or bad about Bud Light. It is what it is. It's a light beer option.
It's $3.50 at the bar usually. That's what I'll say about it.
Yeah. It is what it is. But the conservatives are boycotting Bud Light because they featured a trans person. I think I haven't even followed it that closely, but
trans person on their cans and bottles, and there were horrible jokes made after and stuff.
Okay. Let's be real. Bud Light is not a woke institution. It's they don't give a crap about individuals or groups of people. They just need to make money, and somewhere in their chain they decided that being on this side of this issue will edge out being on the other side of the issue as far as bottom line profits. So they did it. People want to give them credit, and I guess you could, just because they're on the what we would consider the right side of history. But if it didn't pencil out on the bottom line, they wouldn't have done it.
Well, yeah. And just think of the marketing. I mean, people don't realize how often corporations want people to be upset in order for them to get more mention.
It's like publicity.
Yeah, exactly. There's no such thing as bad publicity. It's a very old advertising principle. And like, yeah, I don't trust any rainbow stickers on any snacks, you
Right.
know, like I'm just like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything to me
Pride
personally.
has been completely co-opted by these corporations who've determined, these were not moral decisions. These were accounting decisions to say. Now, that's not to say there aren't, probably good people pushing for it in these companies, but without a proof of profit, these decisions aren't going to get made ever. So that's the corporate capitalistic diversity that's, I don't trust for a second. I'm glad it's there. It means society is changing, so the capitalism does reflect 50+% of the nation that they've determined. So that shows progress. But I'm not going to like give them a cookie for doing it. It's just they're doing it because it's profit. Now, on the other side of that is the not profit part. Smart, like Silicon Valley is a good example of how they use diversity. They've determined that having people of different backgrounds gives you more options and more ideas to generate products or to make things better in their products. And again, it's purely an economic decision, but it makes sense. Someone from, if you have a team that's putting a product together and they're all just white guys, it might be a great product. But if there are people and they're women and there's people from all these different places who have very different perspectives on this product, that's going to be an advantage, over someone who has a more homogeneous team. These are all things that they figured out in like the late 80s, early 90s, like just more diversity gives you more ideas and more innovation. And just logic. So it's I know I sound really cynical, but yeah. And then with this cultural shift, I think, you click on any website of a church or, not any website, most churches. The school I taught at, Zeus Pacific, is currently now a largely Hispanic school. But every page you click on their website has a rainbow coalition of all different kinds of kids. And I think that would be true, every school you click on, whether it's a state school or a private school. You'll never click on a page outside of like, Bob Jones University or Pensacola or, some of these places. You're never going to click on a page and just see all white men, white boys, white students. People are smart enough to know that you have to at least have the appearance of allowing a diverse student population or a diverse employee population or congregation. So, yeah, it's a weird thing. There was a story that just came out last week about a diverse church. It was a church that promoted diversity, and all the Asians left. So that 20% of the population over the last few years left because they were just getting crapped on, even though they were, the whole thing about the church was a diverse thing. But the Asians just got fed up. It was in North Carolina, I think. And by and large, they all just left. And it's like, good for you guys. You should leave.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was certainly you and I come from that camp. That's like, why are you there?
Church just like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. So a couple of things come to mind. One is the idea of kind of like, I had a light bulb went off in my brain while you were talking about like being at Moody in Spokane, and when they would, come around for the promotional material stuff, which I already am like, uncomfortable with just because it's gross. And like Moody Spokane again had quite the reputation of misleading people through promotional material. But like literally it was like, all right, like every Black student that was at Moody Spokane was on the promotional materials. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, that's it. And then it was like, like two like conventionally attractive white women, and then like one hipster looking white guy. Like was pretty standard every year,
That just described like all the schools. In that. Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't like Moody Spokane was alone. I feel like that's a very common college thing. The thing was, it was just like, but at Moody Spokane, we're all white guys. Like, I'm like that's what this school is. Like, I mean, I don't mean to disparage the people who weren't white guys there. I'm just saying as far as the numbers go.
Yeah. Right.
That's what it was. And there were talks, like I do know of some of the behind the scenes. They were aiming to create those websites with that looked very diverse by firing qualified white people. Like, I hate to say, like, like that was a thing that was being talked about. Whether it really happened or not, I think it was more complicated, but
sure,
it that was certainly a move that went that was being taken from Moody. And so now, if you went to Moody's website, they'd have all sorts of appearances, but their doctrinal statement still says women can't be pastors,
Oof.
So, like, it's just like, obviously I always have distrust from like what something's presenting as versus what it is. But
anytime there's a PR department involved or an advertising firm, be wary.
Definitely. But I think what I was thinking about this, like, I think the word diversity has mostly been replaced by the word representation, which I think might be a good thing. I don't know. I wanted to ask you, do you think that's like a step forward, calling it representation rather than diversity, or is that kind of a different thing?
No, I think it's related. I think it's getting closer to what, ideally diversity would be, because you can have diversity and still have complete white supremacy. It just means you let people in who are not white, but are they what role are they playing? How centered is their experience? Like a big megachurch like Saddleback, Asians get crapped on left and right at this church. It keeps happening. The Asians had to make a video. They took it down. I was doing research and I had seen this video several times after the latest fiasco with this anti-Asian sentiment. And the Asians who attend Saddleback, all, a bunch of them got on this video and they're like, I'm not a bad driver. I'm not great at math. Please see me. It's like, if you have to do that, just leave. like they don't see you, and they're just going to keep crapping on you. It's just like, have some self-respect, man. It just broke my heart. It's like, these people were at their wits' end, and this community that they love and they feel like they're a part of, they're realizing, oh man, I'm not seen as a full-fledged human in this setting.
Wow. Yeah. And it shows that, like, but I feel like arguments for representation and diversity are trying to say, if there's more of these, these faces in these spaces, then change will happen. But and
I think that's true in general. It just how fast and how much.
Yeah, because I agree with you. Like, there's been studies, like you referenced, like ever since the 80s, about like, if you have, like, let's say a writer's room for a movie, if that writer's room is forcibly diverse, like you set, like, hey, we're actually going to have 3 of this kind and 2 of this kind, like, which sounds kind of icky at first, but it's like,
I know, it's like affirmative action. Yeah,
but when you do it, you actually make better stuff, and like it really does actually do better things for the culture and everything else. So I'm all for it, but I understand where it's like, but I don't know. Have you ever been in a position maybe where you're like, well, I'm sure you have, at least at APU, with like, I don't want to be a representation of all of this, like, and it gets and maybe the conversation just gets a little bit too optimistic for my blood when it's like, if there's more black television stars, some black boy will want to be president someday. Like, those kind of sentiments, like, sometimes make me feel like, well, what if we did other changes and didn't just worry about representation? But I don't know.
It can't just be numbers. That's I guess what I'll say. It's because the numbers help. The numbers move the needle. But for real systemic change, cultural change, there has to be a willingness of those with the most privilege to give up some of the privilege. And that's a hard thing to ask people. They're used to this status, to being centered, and everyone else. So, the typical church that values diversity, what they really mean is it's still white centered, but they welcome everyone else in to be part of their culture. They're not going to bend to anyone else's culture, but they're welcoming people into a white culture. And that's, as far as church goes, about as good as you can get. I don't know of any, and I've visited and I've read about a lot of churches that focus on diversity, and I think there's probably some that are out there that are successful. If people are listening, shouting at their speakers right now, I'm sorry. I've just been out of church for a long time, but by and large, it's pretty tough to have cultural changes where the majority culture is willing to center someone else that is not them, um, have a head pastor being, or even on the pastoral staff, or the speakers you would come and invite to speak. And it's a tough. It was hard for me even to I felt bad at times in university asking white people to share the space with other perspectives, because I had identified so much with the white identity that I feel bad now at asking you to do this, when really we should all do it. We should all
Mhm.
have a moment where we are seen and centered, and then pass it along. Everyone should have a chance to have the mic, to have the stage, as it were.
Well, yeah, and like, cishet white guys speaking, yeah, you get spoiled. I mean, I'll just call it what it is. You get used to
Yeah.
a certain amount of airtime, for lack of a better way to put it, and it's like, yeah, it's like, sorry, you got to share the spotlight a little bit. Cry me a river. But I hear you. I mean, there's a very empathetic approach you can have to dismantling like the oppressive
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah, and I go out of my way, because someone like you, who is enlightened as you are, I so appreciate that, because I understand, intellectually, not experientially, but I understand that there's a sacrifice. There's a shift in your head that has to occur that makes space for other people. And I find most white folks in America are not willing to do that. They'll come up with their Bible verses or their theology, or their dislike of other people to excuse not addressing it. And so when I come across white, especially white men, but white women, who see me and are willing to see me as an equal in this world with them, that's a beautiful thing, and I salute it, and I'm thankful for it, yeah.
Yeah, well, you deserve it, like clearly, like, and I think like a big thing for me is just like seeing into. I think what helped me was going the individual route, right? Like understanding that
Yeah,
just because,
relational.
yeah, if you see like two Asian people, guess what? They're like walking down the street. Don't assume they're gonna have like the same personality, which sounds so stupid
Right.
to say out loud, but I swear, some white people, that's how they think, and it's wild.
Yeah, you see differences as a monolith, right? You see it,
Right.
it's just this thing that's they don't maybe not know about. Yeah.
It's just like get some more categories, like like I don't know, like I cringe so much when like especially older white folks start talking about like, well, Hispanics like their blah blah blah, and I'm like, what are you
Yeah.
saying? Like, what does that even mean? Stereotypes drive me crazy.
But I feel like in America, we and who are not white, a lot of us buy into that too. Because I've heard Asians say, like Brad Onishi and I, we've talked about. He is the host of Straight White American Jesus.
Name drop.
Back in the day, we would tell Asian jokes just to get ahead of it, and so we would say the stereotypical or the cliched stuff, just so we made the people in the room aware that we were aware of it. We were okay with it. Let's move on. Um, so I've heard black people say, "Oh, black people, we like our whatever." And it's always like, well, I'm not gonna correct you, because it's
Right.
your people and your experience.
Well, and when it's
But where's that
sharing,
coming from?
when it's sharing in the stereotype as kind of like almost a trauma bonding experience,
Yeah.
that's
For sure.
that is what it is. And trust me, like, me and Chris can tell the funniest white people jokes you'll ever hear. But so there's some, because it more internally, I guess you can make more humor out of it.
Yeah. No, it's true. And yeah, and I'll say this: we are allowed to make fun of our own people. It's just what's the context, right? Are we doing it as a bonding moment for us and people we're with, or are we catering to a white nationalist perspective.
Certainly. And that actually ties into something else I wanted to ask you about, because, there's talks about diversity in the workplace or media, politics, whatever field, there's always like, we need more diversity. Is that really about a world we want to build or the world we currently have? Because I feel like I hear both in the rhetoric, and I'm like, well, those are kind of two different things. Because, and my personal bias is I'm like, well, let's build that world, while some people are telling me we already have it. And I'm like, and I'm erasing, not me, but like the idea of we're building towards it erases what we already have. And I'm like, well, I don't know. So that's just a question, I guess, is, are we trying to build something? Or are we trying to represent what we currently have? Or is it a little bit of both?
Ooh. It sounds like both, because we do have, diversity as far as a population in this country. Yes. But is that diversity represented in leadership, in the heads of companies, in the government? No, it's not. I mean, it's starting to be. It's better now than it was. But yeah, I think we're still building toward true representation in the media, right? There's a horrible stat, like this year was great because, everything everywhere all at once swept the Oscars and everyone's talking about this, and it's wonderful. Our joke though is like, well, we're not going to see another Asian American on that stage for like 20 years. And meanwhile, the Hispanic actors are like, well, we're still completely underrepresented in media. They make up the largest group of BIPOC folks in America, and they have like 3 or 4% of the roles in Hollywood.
How about this one for you? Just because it's my field. Journalism. 80% of reporters are white. 80%.
Sure. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And
there's plenty of good white folks in that number for sure.
Maybe
sensitive to the.
Yeah, I guess 0.5%, something. No, I'm just kidding. But well, and the thing is, it's not like there aren't black people who want to do reporting. It's literally functionally an opportunity issue. Is because there's the industry
access. Yeah.
Well, and the journalism industry is going through a lot of like crazy changes right now too. But ultimately, what it comes down to is news orgs say they want diversity. They hire someone for a few months and then they fire them. I mean, that's basically seems to be the pattern of what's happening.
Or they quit, right?
Right. They quit because they're not being listened to, or they're not actually like getting paid what they said they would be getting paid. There's all these things happening. So I guess
at liberal NPR, that mass exodus of the black reporters.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm unfortunately yes. Also, well,
you know some things.
I do know some things. So what? Let me ask you this. I think this is relevant to the discussion too, because it's kind of what we've been circling, I guess, with some of the issues in American culture and diversity. Is how important is it to avoid tokenism when we start talking about diversity?
Ooh. Yeah. Yes, it's important. But it's tough because I don't know. It depends on where you are, the context you're working in. I guess at its worst, tokenism is asking a single person or a small group of people to represent the whole. But man, like, okay, so where we live, you're in Atlanta, I'm in LA. There shouldn't be an issue of tokenism.
Correct.
There shouldn't be.
Right.
We have plenty of people of all different backgrounds to represent, to tell the stories and report the news or do whatever. But yeah, I guess in small towns where there isn't diversity, being the token is not necessarily a bad thing because that's all they got. Okay, there's this one black person in the company or one Asian person teaching at the school because there aren't many of them in the community. So just having that person represent is a huge step for those communities.
Yeah, I agree that there's certain areas where tokenism shouldn't be an issue, both like, and by areas, I mean both regionally and also like certain kinds of industries and that kind of thing. but it can become a thing, especially when it's just like, again, you're trying to make one person represent an entire either race or sexuality or
Right.
gender or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So I guess there's two kinds. There's tokenism by circumstance. It's the one person that just happens to be in the community or in the pool of people. But then there's tokenism by choice or by system. And that's the part where you're like, you need to try harder. There are always people saying, oh, we can't find Black academics, or we can't find, Asian writers. And there's tons of them out there. So you're not trying hard enough. Versus, a situation where the pool that you're drawing from really is limited as far as diversity. So someone might end up being the token, whatever. So yeah, it's hard to say anything quintessential about it. It's just case by case of the system that it's operating in, and the intentions, and the efforts of the people in power.
I think that's actually like the crux of the issue. Exactly what you're saying is it is so contextual, right? Because I think what people get wrong about diversity is trying to make there be like rules for every situation, for every like dynamic and stuff. Because I'm like, well, like I'll use Moody Spokane as an example. They took steps forward and they took steps backward, but those steps were completely determined by what they could do and weren't doing versus like what they couldn't do. Like I was like, well, you're still Moody Spokane, so you're limited, which is definitely going to tie back to some of my beliefs about evangelicalism as a whole. And but in general, I'm like, well, Moody Spokane, it's good for them to, let's say when they had a crisis, go to people of color students and ask them, hey, like, how do y'all feel about our professor tweeting something racist out? It's good that they went to them first. But when it became, let's have a panel of white professors talk about this, it was like, well, what are we doing? And then let's hire a Black faculty next year to make everything okay. It was like, well, what are we doing here?
Yeah, ideally they hire a Black faculty person because they're qualified and would fit in with it's harder to take when it's a reaction to some bad publicity. And again, that goes back to the whole system thing. Are you ahead of the game? Are you being purposeful in honoring the pool of people that you can hire? Or are you just, trying to like tamp down bad news?
Do you think it's important to parse out, like, because diversity is such a vague word, and again, I think it's kind of being replaced with representation more, which I think is a good thing.
DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think it's important to parse out maybe diversity of thought from diversity of like traits? Because I'm like, because those are kind of two different things. They overlap for sure. But I feel like those get kind of muddied sometimes. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And this is way more complex than I'll be able to give voice to. But, at a Zoo Pacific University, they love to tout out the numbers of faculty that were Black. But really, if you dig into those numbers, a whole bunch of those Black faculty were from Africa. So they're not African American. And the faculty who are Black from Africa are highly colonized minds who were very conservative and very fundamentalist and didn't understand most of the systemic issues of racism in America. And so in one of my episodes of Chapel Probation with Dr. Daniel White Hodge, we talked about this and how in Korean too, there was a bunch of professors from Korea. So they get to count as, Asian, but they're not Asian American. So they don't understand the legacy of racism against Asians in America. Very pliable, happy to be there, conservative, not going to cause any trouble, So yes, on paper, they have this diversity, but it's a very curated kind of diversity where, to your point about thought, these are the good, diverse people who aren't going to cause trouble. They're not going to foment revolution or push back against anything that's racist or oppressive.
Definitely. And I think that's like, part of what I like to see in diversity of traits is the diversity of thought, right? Like, it's almost like, to me, the thought is kind of the goal. I mean, just with my personality, I'm not saying it always has to be, but for me, I'm like, what I want to get to is people who have differing opinions in the same room. And the reason that a woman and a man, for example, might have a difference of opinion is just because of the social constructs that make them have different lived experience, right? So it's not really just about like performing equality, if you will. It's really more about like trying to get more ideas in a room, for me at least.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that it's a more complicated issue than that, but that's just like a framing I wish was talked about more.
Exactly. You can have a whole board of trustees or leadership, one person from every race and gender, but if they all have minds that are sort of colonized by white nationalism, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be a force for whiteness. And so on paper, it looks great and the picture looks awesome. But what are those people thinking? What perspective are they bringing?
Yeah. And I'm even all okay with like, and this, everyone has different feelings about this, but I'm like, I like when like I can hear from a black conservative instead of a white one, like I think that is interesting. But I don't want them to just be like the replacement for the white guy because it's cool to be diverse now,
Sure.
That's sort of where the problem lies, because again, if we're not engaging our minds and we're just like saying, plug and play here and there, that gets upsetting. And I've had friends who, feel like they've either been like, hired at a job or accepted into a college because they are a minority and it looked good for the school or the workplace or whatever. And they're usually not happy at that school or that job for very long, and don't usually stay there very long when that's the goal.
Yeah, it's tough with the affirmative action because we definitely need to address inequalities and lack of access. And when you get to the college level, it's kind of too late. Things are already in place in people's minds and in these systems. When I was a teacher, I used to teach middle school, and then when I was a professor, my feeling was always, I'm not against affirmative action. I'm all for anything that helps level the playing field. But if you really want to make change, you go to kindergarten and you start leveling it there, or even preschool, because the studies show that if you're not at a place of your grade level by like third grade, it's really hard to get back. And so if this poor kid is growing up in a place where there's a bad school district with no funding, they've got these teachers that aren't great, and you just stick them in college. To your point, that they don't do well, and it's no surprise because they didn't have the same opportunities to learn in that people like you and I had. And again, that's not to say there are plenty of people who use affirmative action to great effect and go on to do great things. They just needed that boost to help get in. And so I'm not saying, again, not against affirmative action, but I'm also like, yes, and we need to help the little kids get footing and get in the door and on that path to success.
Yeah, I'm actually, for lack of a better way to put it, I'm kind of all for artificial diversity. It sounds kind of nasty put that way, but I'm okay with like doing things that like just promote diversity in ways that go against the typical system, because I think the typical system is bad.
Right.
So that's great.
Worse.
but I'm like, but we should also again tackle that system, which like you said, it starts very young. It starts with having more diverse, like a good example is like Atlanta, right? It's a very diverse city, but if you do look at a map, you'll notice white people live in one spot and black people live in another spot, and that's true of pretty much every major city.
True.
And that's fine, because it's not fine, but it functions because of historical things, and it's not necessarily I'm not sure if I
Yeah.
want laws that say you must have this many neighbors of
Right,
this type.
exactly.
And I think that's what we're trying to avoid. But again, I think sometimes we get distracted by the traits, by the outer, by the
Right.
because
Right.
most of this stuff, that is what it is, outer stuff. I mean, it's really not
Yeah.
much about
And
what
by
people
outer,
think.
you mean like external, like
Yes.
placed upon. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
'cause that's all we
because
have
obviously,
is-
if you're, I don't, if you're of a different sexual orientation, obviously there's internal things going on there too. But,
Sure.
but I am talking about like there's an external expectation on someone to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And yeah, those expectations just suck. We just need to do away with a lot of them.
Well, right. Assumptions about what we expect from people based on what we think they should be. Yeah.
Well, what are
for sure.
some ways to advocate for like a healthy diversity, for you, maybe on behalf of yourself, in certain social settings, and even for me in certain social settings, but like as well as on behalf of others? How do we advocate for diversity in like a healthy way?
The answer to that question is everything, man. And I don't know if I have it. Because
Make it up.
okay, in a perfect world, let's start there. In a perfect world, kids would grow up in loving families and go to school where there's a curriculum that valued everyone's existence, and grew up with this mindset that we're all on this world together with shared experiences. And so if you had that, you wouldn't have all this hoarding of power and access and stuff that you have, based on race. The other thing is the socioeconomic is another kind of diversity that we haven't really talked about. It's related to race, but it's not just race. It's just the human condition is broken, and people look out for themselves and their own, and create in groups and out groups, and we're really up against what seems to be human nature, of this protectionism, the lizard brain of fight or flight. Um, and so, yeah, it would be to me, education, and not, I don't mean like necessarily formal education, but experiential education, psychological education, is just like everything we talked about earlier about seeing the context you're in and seeing people as humans who are equal to you as far as value. We all bring different things to the table, but we're all valued the same. That would solve everything. So there's that. How that happens, I have no idea.
I don't know. You gave enough. I feel like the experts have heard now. They're all listening, and now they're like,
Okay.
"Oh, that's what we need to do." And within a few weeks, we'll have a better world.
So we fixed it. So
we fixed it.
Good job, us. We fixed the human condition.
Look at that. It only took 3 seasons of a white guy's podcast.
It was easy. That was pretty easy. So short of that, all you have are policies. These policies from top down, from government down to individuals, are always going to be these blunt instruments that are not precise. Someone's going to get screwed. There's still going to be picking. You're still picking winners or losers because of the resources of capitalism. There's only so many dollars in existence, and so everyone's chasing those dollars and those resources and those material goods. And yeah, there's just there's a shortage. It's a deficit concept, right? It's like we're all chasing the same thing, to have comfort, to have stuff, the iPhone, Tesla, or whatever, and there aren't enough for everyone to have it. So these systems are established to, they say it's a meritocracy, which it's not. It's just people protecting their own and protecting their own interests. And yeah, so you have to have these laws. That's all we got. You have to have there's affirmative action. Great. Not always, but it's kind of all we have, short of like just deprogramming people's brains individually one by one.
Yeah, and I think it's kind
That's
of
depressing, isn't it?
Well, I think it is a walk and chew gum at the same time type of thing. Like, I think you're right that it's like work within the system and work on getting rid of the system. I'm kind of like in favor of
transforming
both.
the system. Yeah, right.
I'm a little more anarchist, maybe, but I'm like shake the etch a sketch already. But, I'm just so tired of because
that's the revolution that you're speaking of, and I'll join. I just don't know how it's going to look and who's going to survive it and who's going to.
I'm sitting and waiting a little myself to see if I'm going to join the team or not. But in the meantime, I agree with you. There has to be like concerted efforts to work within what we're under right now. And you're right. You're just going to run into problems because of the system we're under. But yeah, it should be a goal. And I think, maybe it hasn't been explicitly stated enough, but diversity is just a good thing. Like, just good things happen when there's diversity. And I'm not really interested in arguing with people who disagree with that.
Right. Ideally, we won't need diversity, equity, inclusion policies. And again, in this perfect world, we all just coexist, and look out for each other as humans, and make sure everyone has enough. Everyone has a roof over their head and food to eat, and then we build from there. But it's just there's haves and have-nots, and that's how people seem determined to keep it that way. And so, we need to focus on diversity. We need to focus on access and inclusion and full mutuality of. Our friends have a podcast called Full Mutuality. That's what it's all about. How do we get to this place where we live in a way that benefits everyone? We're just not there yet.
We're not, but I think it's an admirable goal, and I think it's an admirable goal even if it's never achieved. Like, because it's like,
true,
even in the process of trying to achieve it, things get better, even if they never get perfect.
Right.
And
so maybe we didn't solve human nature, but we see a way forward together in community. So
forward is forward no matter the pace. I'm a big believer in that.
For sure.
So now that we've solved all that, let's talk about evangelicals.
Oh, that's a big step backwards. Okay. Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about the culture and not enough about the cults. So, evangelicalism is diverse in some ways, right? And clearly not in others. Is there something in Christian doctrine, even larger than evangelicalism? Is there something about Christian doctrine that naturally prevents diversity, or is it just more of the larger cultural problems? Or is it a cultural issue or a doctrinal issue? I guess I could ask it that way.
Ooh. I'm going to say it's both, right?
Okay.
Because
cool.
So you look at the Bible, and there is a strong identity to be God's people, God's chosen people, and Jewish people have a way better handle on this than evangelicals, because evangelicals use it and just bludgeon the world with it. They're the saved, they're the chosen ones, they're God's people. America is now God's country. And so when you have that perspective, you're the in group, everyone else is the out group. So it's diversity is tough in evangelical culture because it kind of goes against whatever pseudo theology they're operating with.
Well, that's interesting you say pseudo theology, because that's kind of what I'm curious about. I'm like, is this like theology gone awry, or is this theology doing what theology does? Which is, kind of like impossible to say, since theology is actually very diverse.
Yeah. But you can look at how it affects people in practice, and to your point, it's used negatively.
Yeah, and I think there are. Well, let me ask it this way: what would happen to Christianity in America if it did become diverse?
It would be better. I mean, again, how we're defining diverse.
Well, let's say our ideals our ideals within the system. We'll put it that way. So like, not necessarily a utopia, but like, whatever we would want to see in the business world or in politics, if that happened in Christianity, what would happen?
I almost can't picture that just from my experience.
I can't either. It's kind of a trick question, but I mean, truly, okay. I'm like, what would happen?
Well, things would be better. I mean, the problem in my mind is that the Bible, the one text or texts that we have, the world has to determine what is Christianity, is so flawed and so contradictory that's why there's thousands of denominations and ways to be a Christian, and they're all disagreeing on what gets you to hell or what gets you to heaven, or what are deal breakers or what's not, or how churches are supposed to be run. And most of it's not even in the Bible. And so when you add so when you say if there's diversity, you're talking about how a church body could actually represent or reflect the population of the people in all its diversity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we can go with that and roll with that. I would also, it's just to add to what you were saying, I think if there's diversity in churches, they all become universalist. And I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting.
Suddenly, then what is it? Everyone's a Unitarian.
Yeah, and then I'm like, well, then Christianity's no more. Basically, I'm leading the question, but what I'm trying to get to is a theory I've put out before is that Christians don't want diversity, because if there's diversity of people or even just diversity of thought, that like necessarily competes with the uniformity that's required in cults. And yeah, that might be an oversimplification, but I'm trying to think of it a different way, and I struggle to.
Yeah. So you're saying diversity would sort of make the whole thing implode or eat itself.
I think so.
It would diversify its way right out of existence.
Yeah, which I'm not necessarily saying is a bad thing, but it's just, and again, I'm working certainly with evangelicalism, but even when I think of like bigger Christian umbrellas, like I'm trying to picture what a diverse Christianity would even mean.
Yeah, because if, like I said, it goes back to the Bible. If there's so many, each denomination or each sect of the cult has their verses to justify or support their point of view. And those verses will contradict other verses. And so they have to protect that and fight for that and stick with it to stay in existence, because it would have to change if they started to recognize those other verses or those other perspectives, theological or philosophical. And so, yeah, to your point, yeah, they need to limit the diversity of thought and, as an extension, identity, to just maintain the status quo of their existence. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't mean this to just bash on the Christians. I just mean it in the sincerity of, I'm like, I would love a more diverse Christianity, but I just don't know, because I frame so much of how I understand Christianity as a cult. Cults and diversity don't mix. It doesn't work, because cults are literally about uniformity in so many ways. So I just
within themselves,
it's hard for me to comprehend.
Because interestingly, there is diversity in Christianity. Oh my gosh, there's two churches next door to each other. You make a list of things that they believe.
Oh yeah,
the
well they can't. A lot of them can't even agree. A lot of them can't agree on how you baptize people or what, or even how you take communion. I mean, like, there's a lot of disagreements, and they can still sometimes recognize each other as Christians. But they do that more outwardly than in reality. I think about, I grew up in a Protestant church, just the amount of dunking on Catholics that happened, for no real apparent reason. I was like, that seems pretty cultish to me, and they would probably, some of those people in that church probably would have called Catholics cultists, but cults can call other cults. I mean, they do it all the time. So I don't know. It's definitely complicated, and I don't want to oversimplify. And sometimes I fear I do oversimplify. but I'm just trying to do the thought exercise of what a diverse Christianity would look like. And maybe there's some progressive pastor dying to tell me about their church, but I just don't trust them. And maybe that's a me issue, but it's hard for me to comprehend it, you know?
Yeah. And the pastors that I know and respect would cop to not having definitive answers to this. It's those people that are super absolutely certain about what they believe that I don't trust. And so the Christians that I hang out with that are still Christian are the ones that embrace, the mysteries and the complexities and the confusion of this world. And so I'm good with them. They can believe in Jesus. They can believe in the Bible as some kind of allegory. To fit. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, and maybe the church is kind of like we're looking at it as a microcosm of just the general human condition. Because I think it's just human nature to create in groups and out groups, and my people versus those people. So even without church, I think there would still be divisions in society just based on human nature. It's just church is the game of our time, of the modern time.
Definitely. And I do want to clarify, like, I don't think if Christianity went away tomorrow, cults would go away tomorrow.
Yeah. I don't even think the world would be that much better off. It is a problem, but I just feel like humans would regroup in some other form and make clatches and groups that were still detrimental to, the majority of the population.
There has to be fundamental differences in how humans behave in general. Because again, one of the things that gets misunderstood about cults in general is I'm like, no, cults, like, they don't like just prey on especially vulnerable people. In my opinion, they prey on the vulnerabilities in us all. And so, I think you're right that, like, it's not, as long as there are hierarchies, which as far as I can tell, there always will be to some extent. There's going to be bad things that happen to people. Because there's such a lack of consent in these hierarchies.
So even without religion, we group ourselves into all kinds of categories, right? You look at, like, soccer fans killing each other because of the team that they follow. You look at Coke versus Pepsi, Taylor Swift versus Beyonce fans, or BTS. Like, people get passionate about what they think represents them, or what they attach themselves to. And so good things are done through those groups, and negative things happen in those groupings. And again, this all kind of goes back to human nature. So take away Christianity, maybe Beyonce becomes like the world ruler that people.
Oh, I much prefer that.
Yeah, over Taylor Swift.
Definitely over Taylor Swift.
I mean, ideally they would join forces. I don't have strong feelings about either one of them, but, like, I would hope they would join forces and unite the world, and we can move forward. Appreciating.
I don't know if I'm there yet. I'm still in the cult of Beyonce, I guess. But I hear what you're saying, though. It's a very valid point that it's like, it's less about the dressing, right? About, like, what these structures are, and more about, like, how leaders is, my model is always how leaders control followers.
And people are always looking for these leaders, right? Like, there's, like, something in our human nature that is drawn to, strong men. So, we follow Rick Warren or those other mega church pastors, because they're these huge personalities that people just glom onto as, like, oh, yeah, that's my guy. What he says, and if people, and this goes back to education, if people could just be confident in their own thoughts and their own ability to decode what's happening around them, we wouldn't need these leaders per se. We need people to lead us, but we don't need to identify so heavily with the people that we turn to for policy or for leadership.
Yeah. Couldn't say it better myself.
Thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think we got a lot done today. My goodness, I should take the rest of the day
Where's our
off.
Nobel Prize?
Hand it over. Hand it
I'll
over.
wait. We'll just yeah.
Scott, it's always great having you on. It's always so fun, and we, clearly fix all the world's problems.
I know, we're a good team, man.
Yeah, I'm a good bit into your book. I have the Audible version, which is out now. By the time this podcast drops, I think it'll be just a couple days before your official release date. Tell the people about your book and where to get it.
Yeah, April 18th it comes out. It's called Asian American Apostate, as John said at the beginning. It's sort of my story of a lot of parts of my story of deconstructing, teaching at a kind of crappy university and dealing with that, but also forming my identity as a human being outside of Christianity, which in my case just was an Asian American. But I'm hoping there's sort of universal applications to just finding life outside of faith and finding life that sort of kicks ass, that's way better than I ever had inside of faith. And so, yeah, it's got rock stars. It's got a Gilmore Girl at the end, and that's my pitch to get people to buy the book. It's got cool people, cooler than I am.
Oh yeah, there's the self-deprecation we all know and love. It's a must read in my opinion. Very, very, very happy that you did it, and it was very good. And Scott, can't wait to see what we'll solve next in time you come on.
Yeah, bring it, man. Let's tackle something else next time. I always love coming on. You have a great thing, and shout out to Chris. We missed you. I felt your absence. But
yeah, rest in peace, Chris. He's alive, but we just hope he's getting some rest.
Yeah, rest in peace for sure. Good rest.
Yeah. All right, Scott. It's good talking to you, and for the rest of y'all, I'll talk to y'all soon. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast or other work I'm doing, go to thecultofchristianity.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, listen, follow, share, and consider subscribing for $5 through Spotify for additional content, or give as much or as little as you can to support this work through links in the show's notes. Every dollar helps further this important discussion as well as start other exciting projects. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.